In this series of photographs, recently published in the New York Times article, Hidden in Plain Sight, The Ghosts of Segregation, photojournalist Richard Frischman captures the physical remnants of segregation that still endure across America's built environment. His photographs capture such structures as colored entrances to theaters, segregation walls designed to separate black patrons in restaurants, and faded signs advertising all-white staff. One photograph depicts the remains of Bryant's Grocery and Meat Market in Money, Mississippi, the site where Emmett Till was accused of whistling at a white woman, which would lead to him being kidnapped, tortured, and lynched at 14 years of age. All that remains of the structure is a single, crumbling brick wall, shrouded in layers of vines and thorns. A human-built structure, marked by the horrors of white supremacy, now fuses with the natural landscape. Frischman explains that he hopes his photographs will heighten awareness, motivate action, and spark an honest conversation about the legacy of racial injustice in America. Through his focus on legacy, Frischman recognizes these traces of segregation not merely as reminders of a painful history, but as physical markers of the racial injustice that continues to shape our landscape, our present, and our future. How should acknowledgement of this legacy of white supremacy inform our ways of thinking about our environment and our future? The paradigmatic conception of the current environmental crisis within the mainstream environmental discourse emphasizes the newness of the threat that humans are now facing. Such a perspective maintains that the devastation of climate change is unparalleled by any preceding forms of devastation in human history, underscoring an urgent need for radical action. This perspective, however, also obscures the ways in which the environmental crisis is prefigured by other moral challenges from history, such as slavery. As humanity stands at the precipice of widespread destruction of life as we know it, we are faced with the options of either imagining entirely new ways of living or seeking guidance from existing traditions that have led humans through past struggles. This conflict in environmental thinking parallels the tensions that existed during the Reconstruction era, when white opportunists seized the opportunity to rebuild on the sites of plantations, while the formerly enslaved people who had worked and cultivated those plantations reaped little to nothing from the reconstructed American landscape. Just as the rebuilding of the American landscape during the Reconstruction era ultimately reinforced white supremacy, contemporary environmentalist calls to reimagine our lifestyles and worldviews threaten to erase the historical intersections of race and the natural environment if we do not challenge whose voices shape environmental thinking. Audre Lorde reminds us that the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house, and it is clear that the master, embodied by the oppression of white supremacy, is chiefly responsible for the destruction of our natural environment. We need not look any further than the glaring inequalities that exist across races in regard to the impact of environmental crises. People in marginalized communities are disproportionately affected by things like air pollution, water contamination, and waste dumping. For example, in December 2020, Ella Roberta Adu Kissy Debra became the first person in Britain to have air pollution legally listed as a cause of death. She was only 9 years old when she passed away in February 2013 due to acute respiratory failure caused by severe asthma compounded by air pollution exposure.
We will leave all the failures of authorities for another day. I want this to be about Hair Day. And she wanted to know, and yes, it's taken me 7 years, but I've got here now. I will go to bed this evening knowing that at some stage we can get a death certificate for her and it's actually going to be on there.
Ella lived near South Circular Road in Lewisham, in London. The pollution from the road caused the levels of nitrogen dioxide and particulate matter in the air in Lewisham to exceed the safe limits established by the World Health Organization.
These guidelines have existed for years, but the government has chosen to ignore them because people simply didn't know about the dangers. And it's something that I really hope that this case has helped highlight and helped bring to the foreground, and something that will be taken into account in the future.
Anjali Rahman Middleton, a childhood friend of Ella, co-founded the group Choked Up, an organization advocating for and led by Black and brown teenagers living in areas that are affected by pollution. Environmental racism, however, does not only look like disproportionate effects of pollution on marginalized communities. Sometimes it looks like a much more deliberate form of oppression. Consider, for example, the construction of the Dakota Access Pipeline, which cut through land that is sacred to Native American peoples. This pipeline was constructed despite the potential environmental hazards it poses to people of the Standing Rock Indian Reservation, after former President Donald Trump expedited the environmental review of the project.
I was raised with the stories that we are the stewards of this land, so we have to protect the water like our ancestors did. We have to protect the land like our ancestors did.
I'm here for my kids, my grandkids, because I want to make sure that everybody's children's safe, everybody has a chance to drink clean water in their lifetime.
This mentality that allows dominant cultures to feel entitled to do whatever they please with the land that they are on is a product of white supremacy. It is not dissimilar from the colonial practices on which the United States is founded, namely the genocide of Native Americans. Black theologian James H. Cone argues, the logic that led to slavery and segregation in the Americas, colonization and apartheid in Africa, and the rule of white supremacy throughout the world is the same one that leads to the exploitation of animals and the ravaging of nature. Confronting the white supremacist logic that undergirds humans' ravaging of the natural environment, Cone illuminates how marginalized people's experiences of exploitation and oppression at the hands of white supremacy parallel the destruction of the environment by white supremacist cultures. It is here that we must, again, be conscious of the rhetoric that is employed in discussions of the environmental crisis. Rhetoric that, in emphasizing the unprecedented threat that climate change poses to humanity, also ignores the parallels that exist between environmental degradation and historical and contemporary acts of racial oppression. Strictly viewing climate change as an unprecedented human crisis enables environmentalist thinkers to distance themselves from the ways in which environmental injustice is rooted in white supremacy, as calls to reimagine or rethink our lifestyles ignore marginalized people who already hold ecocentric perspectives despite white colonial hegemony. The path toward a more sustainable future should not be framed as something new for white people to discover, as such a perspective further erases marginalized people who have been silenced by white supremacy. Recognizing the racist legacies that shape our past and present is an essential step in imagining a better future.
A living man, a living man. I want to be a living man. In all the world, he moves around, he walks around, he turns around. I see each tree, I read each vein, I hear each bug up on each leaf, the buzzing fly. fireflies, the splashing fish, they move around this living man. A living man. A living man. I wanna be